and a tip jar. If anybody wants to kick in a couple of bucks to help pay for Amy's gas coming up here, we'd greatly appreciate that afterwards as well. So my first question, or I should say my third question for Amy here is, what is the size of your staff at Novello Festival Press? And tell us a little bit about some of the roles of the staff members.
Well, you're looking at the staff of Novello Press. It's a one-of-a-kind publication project. The only literary publisher that we have found anywhere in the country that is funded, supported, and housed completely at a public library. So I want to add, first of all, to Rosemary's commercial for support for the local and regional public libraries in this area, as well as those anywhere you may relocate. Libraries are essential to our communities, so do please support them with your dollars and your patronage. But Novello Press started as an offshoot of a kind of a wish list among writers in our region who were very disgruntled that there were just not enough places to get published. And without boring you with all of that long, convoluted story, we floated the idea at a couple of different places, some colleges, some nonprofit centers, but then one day we had the V8 moment, myself and a couple of other freelance writers, when we said, the library is where all the books are. Wouldn't that be a natural home for a publishing company? So long story short, our wonderful, brilliant public library of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County gave us a little bit of their discretionary money to start this literary upstart press. Now, who is the staff? It's me. And in consultation with freelance designers, freelance editors, freelance marketing folks, all kinds of independent creatives, we have this upstart literary project that seeks to publish the work of emerging writers from the Carolinas in fiction and nonfiction, occasionally poetry. But that's sort of it in a nutshell. But in a publication project or a publishing company, which is the size of Novello Press, and there are a lot of them that are this size, an independent publishing company, really the editorial director or the publisher wears a lot of different hats. I load books into boxes and unload books. I copy edit manuscripts. I do budgets. I do sales forecasting. I drive to Raleigh on Saturday night to talk to aspiring writers, and I like it that way. There's a big gap between giant publishing, the Random House and the HarperCollins models in the world, and what's become what I think is a very important grassroots independent publishing movement. As a lot of the larger publishing companies have gobbled each other up and you have these mega companies, there are not a lot of the middle-sized publishers that there used to be. So that's kind of good for independent publishers because it means that a lot more stuff is available to us to publish. So that gives us a good problem to have, which is more good work than we can publish, but it lets us really have good relationships with the literary talent in our regions.
That's a great answer. And by the way, did I mention that we have a tip jar up here for Amy's gas? My next question is for Robin. How did you first get your first job in publishing, Robin? Can you explain that?
Yeah. The short story is I got my first job in publishing after I found out that Oxford University Press had an office here in Cary, which intrigued me. And I got on their website, and I saw that the journals department and the books department were both hiring, and I sent in my resume and got 2 interviews and got hired by the books department, which was fabulous. Journals didn't want me. It was their loss, but no, that's the short story. The long story is that I was a journalism major and took a convoluted path after I graduated and wanted to be in publishing, but didn't want to move to New York. So I floated through the random jobs that journalism majors who don't want to be reporters end up doing. And then I landed at a research center at UNC where I did proofreading and editing and video production for them. And that was enough to get me in at Oxford, along with the fact that I had been reading on my own while I worked at UNC. a very riveting book called The Chicago Manual of Style. Because someone told me, and other books I read told me, that I needed to know that to work in publishing. So I did read it, and about half of it did not make sense until I got my job at Oxford University Press. So that's the long story, and the best part about that story is there was a manager in the academic books production department at Oxford who wanted someone who had a lot of different experience as opposed to being only in publishing. And I just happened to have on my resume all the things I've told you: customer service, retail, and a stint at the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office, which I think gave me an interesting leg up for some reason. So that's the long and short of that.
It's a great answer. Laura, how about you? How did you get your first job in publishing?
Well, my very first job in publishing came about as from a panic attack, essentially. I was starting my senior year at Duke, go Blue Devils, and went, I'm an English major and women's studies double major. I know I don't want to go to grad school because I had enough of this, thank you. But I've been working in a science lab for 3 years, and I really don't know what I want to do when I graduate. So I thought, what could possibly be related to my majors? Publishing. Okay, that sounds vaguely related to English. So I called up Duke Press and said, I've got a work study. Can you give me work? Can I come in and work for you? And they said, yeah, we always have a lot of work studies. And then I did something which I'm completely shameless, and I will just ask point blank for what I want, and realize now that I was extremely lucky to get what I want at this point. I said, can you put me with someone who will teach me? I don't want to make copies all day long. Now, 90% of the work studies make copies all day long. And they just collected their $5 an hour, but they put me with the journal's special projects editor. And I learned everything from scratch. I mean, she was in charge of mostly taking special issues of journals and then turning them into a book. So like Boundary 2 had a special edition on the new millennial feminism. And so, okay, we're going to redo that as a book. So I have to do the design and any changes that need to get made. And I learned things like they're called running feet, not running bottoms, which is, I only heard running heads, so like running bottoms made sense to me. And I learned all sorts of interesting mistakes I was making.
Copy editing humor. I love it.
Okay, yes. Yeah, real funny if you're in the know. Okay, and then after the first semester, my boss left for another job, and they didn't have anyone to replace her for 4 months. So her 2 managers and I did her job, and I have never been happier. Because we'd have weekly meetings. Where are we on these 2 projects? I'm like, I checked this and I checked this and I made the tear sheets, and like, great, okay, what's next for you? And I'd tell them, and I would come in on every hour I could, and I loved it. So I stayed there for a year, and then was unemployed for several months after I graduated. And then my roommate got me a job, desktop publishing. And it kind of snowballed from there until I realized I could make more money for myself than for this company that wanted to pay me only $10 an hour. So I quit my job. And that was 12 years ago that I quit my job. I've been full-time freelance copy editor since then.
And you've got a boot camp coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I do, shameless self-promotion. Because there is not a lot of training for copy editors. I mean, there's virtually none, unless you want to pay a lot of money to go to the Brown Summer Institute of Publishing, and they only take a few people. I've mentored a lot of copy editors over the years, and I got together with a colleague of mine who's a professional proofreader, and we decided we're going to offer a 1-day full seminar, how to be a freelance copy editor and proofreader. It's going to be a lot of hands-on work, a lot of examples. There's going to be a lot of take-home assessments in which I will review your work one-on-one. And that's going to be October 3rd. It's held at Oxford University Press. I have flyers, and we only have 4 registration spots left if you're interested, so see me. It's going to be $250 a person, and we will be offering a January session as well once we have a date picked for that. So if you can't do it between now and then, but it's going to be good.
Do you have a website?
We do. It's on the flyer. I'll make sure you get it.
And so the next question that I have is for Amy. Amy, as a publisher, what kind of writing do you want to see, and what do you not want to see? You mentioned the genres a little bit, but can you be a little bit more, elaborate a little bit on that if you can?
That's a really good question. And I actually have a list of top 10 things to do wrong and right when submitting your work to Novello Festival Press. If you email me, I will send it to you, because there are so many simple things you can do to help yourself get your work accepted, and so many dumb things that I'm sure we've all done as editors and writers without meaning to. Not that there are only 10, but Very, very simple things. When somebody emails me or calls me or stops me in the hall and says, I have just written this great inspiration book for kids, I know that they don't know the first thing about me, that they have not taken the time to find out what we publish. I mean, they may have looked up my name and seen that I'm an editor, but if they had looked to the third line on our page, it would say, we publish literary fiction and literary nonfiction from emerging writers in the Carolinas. So rule number one is, do your homework and look at what you're submitting, whether it's for me or to any other kind of publisher. Read their guidelines. If you are not clear on something, ask appropriate questions, call their administrative staff or whatever, and look on the web and have some initiative. Don't go to one of those classes that tells you how to do an elevator pitch in 90 seconds to get an editor to pay attention to you, because if it's the wrong editor, it's completely a waste of your time. And you will not only not make a friend, you will do the opposite. So to answer Stacy's question about what we look for, we want literary fiction and literary nonfiction from Carolina writers. So if everyone lives in this room lives in the Carolinas, you can submit to me. If you do it at the right time, a book-length work, 200 to 400 pages, for example, is what we request for our Novello Literary Award. Doesn't have to be set in the Carolinas. Everything is very clearly spelled out in our guidelines. And once in a while, somebody will come up with a question we have not thought to answer preemptively, and I'm always glad to do so. But if you call me, and I'm in the middle of my workday, and you want to start telling me about discovering all these letters in your grandmother's attic and what you're going to do with them 5 years down the road when your kids get out of high school and you've got some peace and quiet, that's not something I can help you with.
That hasn't happened to you, has it?
All the time. Sure. And it's not a bad thing to do, but would you call your dentist and start telling him what you're going to do with your teeth in 5 years? No, so why would you call your editor and tell her, or a prospective editor and tell her what you want to do with your writing in 5 years? So do your homework, email me, I'll send you the top 10 list of things, and make it easier for yourself.
That's a great answer. I'm kind of curious, too, what kind of writing that you've seen that has worked well? What's the kind of writing that has really wowed you? What other than being literary fiction, what really wows you as an editor?
Well, there's a saying that a lot of people can write, but a good number of them don't have anything to say. Writing can be, to a certain extent, a learned skill, but having something to say is equally important, if not more important. Writing one sentence, one paragraph, one chapter is doable. Sustaining whatever it is that gets you that far throughout the rest of your memoir, biography, narrative, historical fiction, literary fiction, genre fiction is really, really hard. The advice that I give to people who have not ever undertaken a book-length work is to get good at some of the shorter forms. Write essays, write commentaries, write memoirs, write short stories. Get comfortable with the process of writing, develop some momentum. It's like running a marathon. You're not going to undertake it if you can't run 5 miles. Start small, get some confidence, get some momentum, get some feedback, do some things that help you sharpen your skills so that when you're ready to take on that larger piece of work, you've got some tools in your toolbox. Good writing, even Stephen King says that a good writer can get better, but even a very good writer can never really work to become great. And there are really just a very small number of writers who are great, who have that gift, whose writing just, makes me want to curl up in a ball and just forget ever picking up my own pen again because I know the bar is that high. Those are writers like Ashley Warlick and Dot Jackson and Ron Rash and people who just have that gift and something to say. They've got it both. Some of us have one, some of us have the other, some of us have neither. Those folks have both.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Novello Festival Press Award and the contest?
Novello Literary Award is given once a year to a writer of literary fiction or nonfiction who resides in the Carolinas. We will be announcing at the Novello Festival this year on October 14th in Charlotte. Please come, it's free. The winner of this year's award. At that time, we will open the call for submissions for next year's award. It will run from October through May, and that's when we want to see your best work. If you are almost through with that novel or that collection of short stories or that memoir or a book-length work of literary fiction or nonfiction, 200 to 400 pages, double-spaced, please, not single-spaced, that's when you'll want to send it to me. And you don't want to call me a week after the deadline and go, I just couldn't get it finished. Is it okay to send it now? And you also don't want to nail me tonight and go, do I have to wait till October? Can't you just take it with you tonight? No, so please, read the guidelines on our website. Go to novellopress.org. The guidelines will be there. And then send us your best work, even works that we don't publish. We occasionally will recognize some honorable mentions and some finalists, give you a little honorarium prize. It's a very nice thing to have on your resume. And a writer who won this year, Dale Neal from Asheville, his book will be released at Novello. It's called Cow Across America. And it's about two kids who walk to California with a cow. Or maybe they don't. We're not really sure. But this book was submitted to us a couple of years ago, and we liked it fine. But that year there was just something else that burned to be published. So we did that book, and this year Dale submitted it again, and we said, perfect timing. So sometimes it's a matter of timing. He had the right combination of something to say, nice stylistic writing, likable characters, a little kind of heartstring tug, all the things that you want to see in good writing or in good reading.
That's a great answer as well. Robin, can you tell us a little bit about what a production editor does?
Yeah, a production editor is the person at the press, once you are so lucky to be published. Your acquisitions editor is the person who will sign the book and will hopefully work with you some before it gets to production. The production editor is the person who then takes your manuscript once the writing is finished, pretty much, and will take that book and set schedules of when the copy editor is going to get it, how long they have to return it. Then when the proofreader is going to get it, when it's going to go to the typesetter, when it's going to come back, how long the designer has to design it. There are lots of technical things involved in getting that book out the door. Your production editor, once it's been handed off from the acquisitions editor to the production editor, is your liaison between the press and yourself. He or she will be the person to let you know when you're going to get your copy edited manuscript, how long you have with it to make changes. Please don't rewrite your book at this stage. If you want to rewrite your book, do it before the production editor has it, because then you'll have a very unhappy production editor, acquisitions editor, and press who will think twice about publishing you again. Yeah. Especially don't rewrite your book in proofs. When you get those pages that look like a book printed out on paper, do not then cross out half of chapter 5 and say, I think this really works better. Please don't do that. That costs a lot of money. I mean, you may think that you've come up with this brilliant thing to change it. That costs a lot of money to change at that point. All the schedules have been set, and you're going to push everything back, and then you're going to call that production editor, if you're a certain type of author, and complain that your book is coming out late and not in time for the thing that you wanted it for. That was your fault. So that's who the production editor is, and that makes us sound like a really cranky English teacher, but no, the production editor is there to help you get that book out the door according to schedule. So that's what a production editor does.
Can I add something to that?
Please do.
I'd like to add something to that. One of the reasons your book has to be out the door on schedule is so it can get into bookstores. If this fine bookstore has ordered your book for October and it does not ship, do you think they're going to sit around and go, well, gosh, we can wait till November or even January, no hurry, no big rush? No, they need books to sell. They're going to buy another title. And when your book finally hits the street, as they say, the street date, and it drops, they may or may not still have the interest, the funds, the event room to have you out there. So it's not just to be arbitrary, it's part of the larger picture of making your book a success.
Can I add something else? She made me think of something else. And part of that is, and this is changing somewhat now because publishing is changing so much, but your publisher has to reserve a spot at the actual printing press for your book.
Right.
And if they miss that date, they may have to wait months to get another spot. And talk about expensive. That's even more expensive than rewriting your book. So it's not that your publisher has just decided you have to have it in by now because that's good for us. There are lots of things, and it's planned down the line. When I was at Oxford University Press, sometimes we would get books that were due to be published a year and a half after I got it, and we had solid work to do on it until that date. So the publisher is very busy during that whole time.
I'll add to that too. Just 'cause. For the past 2 months, all the books I've been copy edited aren't due to come out till 2010. And if the author takes too long to look at the reviews, it screws up the whole schedule, which means that you got to pay rush charges. Particularly if there's someone's trying to get a textbook in the college stores before a certain semester, it has to have enough lead time to get done. And I invented a game that publishers like to play sometimes. It was called Spank the Author. It was a virtual game. We didn't actually do it, but I would come in and say, well, this author needs a spanking, and this one needs a spanking. This one gets a nice fruit basket because they did everything the way they were supposed to. So, I'm just saying.
I've got a question on here about your dream author and the author from hell, but and it sounds like we're kind of getting to that. But first, I don't want to assume that everybody knows exactly what a copy editor does. Can you explain a little bit about what a copy editor does, and then also as a freelancer, what kinds of things can you do to increase the number of contracts that you get?
That's a very good question. I get asked, I'll tell people I'm a professional copy editor, and I get one of two statements, usually both. The first one is, oh, so you read books and tell the publisher what you think? I'm like, no, that'd be a great job. That's what a reviewer does, or an acquisitions editor. And they said, oh, so you check spelling and grammar and stuff? I'm like, yes, but there is a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of nuance. I do have to be very consistent, but I have to balance that with flexibility to let the author's voice shine through. So my job as a copy editing is the last stage of editing before a book goes to typesetting, before it goes to pages. So it is the absolute final draft. It has been through the acquisitions editor, the developmental editor. The text is complete and final as the author wants it. All the visual elements, tables and articles, figures, any permissions, all of that's been ready, and I'm given a book, generally by the publisher. I work almost exclusively for publishers. They said, here's the book. We need a copy edit. Here's the things to note. Here's what we want you to do, and we need it in 5 weeks. Great. So I go and give a very clean read. Yes, I'm looking for spelling, and with Oxford University Press specifically, I do change a lot of British spellings to American spellings, and British punctuation to American punctuation. They accept authors from all over the world, but for the U.S. production offices, it's all U.S. style. I create the style sheet, I make the changes, I query things only if they're really confusing, like this sentence has 2 verbs and only one time, and it took a left turn, I think there's some missing words and I can't figure out what it is, so I'll query the author. But that's kept to a minimum because we don't want the author to have to spend, rewriting it. I'm paid to make a certain amount of judgment calls on whether a change is legitimate or not. So I go through it. I have to check references with scholarly work, check the references, make sure all the ones that are cited in the text appear in the references, and all the references that are listed appear in the text. And I finalize the table of contents just based on titles, not page numbers. And then I hand it in, and then it goes either to the author for review, and then usually to the typesetter. So I'm the last set of eyes before it goes to a typesetter, and that last set of eyes can be extremely valuable because I know I write some of my own work. I can't edit my own work. I can't see those typos. I had on my LinkedIn for a few days. I'm very excited about the Profo Reading Book Camp. So I couldn't type the word proof. Like, I really can't edit my own work. And sometimes Robin and I were talking about this. Somebody who wants you to edit the work will then want you to proofread it, and I cannot do it. Once I have read it, I cannot see it again. Mm-hmm. I'll miss the changes unless it's been like 6 months. And then I'm like, well, maybe, but you'd be better off getting someone else to do it. And what was the second part? Getting more contracts.
Yeah, what kinds of things can you do as a copy editor to get more contracts with publishers?
Generally, it is, publishing is a network. And you notice that we are all women. I've always called publishing the old girls network instead of the old boys network because it is full of women. And publishers talk to each other. So I get a lot of my work through word of mouth referrals, or when people leave to go to, another job. I had someone I used to work for a press in Alabama. That person I used to work for now works for a newspaper in Birmingham, and the newspaper hired me to be their copy editor. It's every other week, so it's not so bad. Or they'll say, hey, I was talking to my colleague over at Menasha, and I've got a book, and she said, you're good at this kind of thing. Yeah, okay, send it to me. But to actually seek out new clients can be a little tricky. The key that a lot of people who are getting started with professional copy editing don't know is whom to ask for work. And if you want to work for a publisher, you call up or email the managing editor for journals, or managing editor for books. And you say, hi, I'm interested in being a freelancer. Do you have a copy editing test I could take? Many of them will have some sort of copy editing assessment. They want you to edit it, follow their instructions to the letter, and return it with your resume. And make sure your resume has absolutely no typos. One typo in the trash. Immediately. Yes, immediately. And that's generally how you get work. If it's a large, very large press, and they'll have a database of people, they're like, great, you passed the test, we'll put you in the database. You might not hear from them for months. Or years, really? Sometimes. But people's like, well, how do I get work once they have it? I'm like, you might need to send them a little email now and then. Hey, I was really glad to hear I passed the editing test. Might you have anything I can do? You'd be surprised. Well, yeah, now that you mention it. And I email my contacts at presses all the time, hey, my schedule's freeing up in 2 weeks. Do you have anything coming in? Because I think about 2 weeks ahead. If I don't have work lined up for 2 weeks ahead, I'm going to be in trouble. And they're like, yeah, we just got a whole stack of books. I'll pick one out for you. And if you got a specialty, ooh, that's good. You can market yourself more specifically. For some reason at Oxford, I am known as the go-to math girl. I can edit math. If you're like, you understand math? Heck no, I don't understand it. I know how to edit it. I know when it's set in properly, and I can read it like a sentence, oddly enough. It's not that difficult. A lot of people are frightened by it. So if they get a math thing, they'll hand it to me.
That's cool. Robin, how about you? Do you have any strategies for furthering your contacts or anything that you've learned over the years?
Well, that answer was really great because it is about networking. And as Stacy and I have discussed before, if you really think about it, it's not even just publishing. Life, jobs, all that, networking is important. And I know, too, some of us editor-ish and writerly people, we are not so great at that sometimes. I like to talk a lot, so I'm pretty good at networking, but sometimes I can be overbearing at networking, so I have to find this balance. But really, the more people you talk to, you come to events like this, you go to writers' conferences, you go to workshops, things like that, and you meet more people, and you tell them about what you do, and you give them a card, and you cannot be afraid to make those phone calls and say, hey, my schedule's freeing up, and you can't assume that just because you haven't heard from them, they don't want to hire you. You have to, send them an email and give them a phone call. And when you see them somewhere, say, hey, I really still want to work for you. So give me give me what you got. Let me know the next time you have a book coming around. That is the main way that I get new clients. When I talk to authors, because I do some work for individual authors, and that's the way I get work from new publishers, is, like when they move to a new press and they'll kind of take me along with them. Or sometimes, if, like at Duke University Press, I am the proofreader for Yale University's theater journal by default, because I just always have been. And that staff position has turned over several times, but they always say, Robin is the proofreader for this. So I always get that journal back again. I don't know. That's a very kind of vague answer, but that's how I do it.
It's a great answer because it leads me to a question I wanted to ask Amy about writers' conferences. And we've all heard of writers' conferences. How many folks have actually been to a writers' conference in the room? About half of us, a little bit over half. What role, Amy, would you say that writers' conferences play for you as a publisher at Novello Festival Press, and which writers' conferences might you recommend? Of course, we all know the North Carolina Writers Network Fall Conference. What other ones should be on our radar?
I have to wear two hats when answering this question because years before I was ever a publisher, I was a writer. So I've been on, as they say, both sides of the desk. I've attended the North Carolina Writers Network Conference a number of times, and it's always fabulous. The only problem is that North Carolina is so big that if you live in Wilmington, it might not be so easy to get to Asheville and vice versa. But they do things around the state. You can join the network for a very modest fee and get on their email list, and you can also see things that are terrific resources outside of the actual conferences, which take place, I think, twice a year. So, for example, if you have written a memoir and you may need an editor before submitting it to a publisher, you could look among their classifieds for members who offer editorial services. Or if you want to join a group in your region that has a mystery writers club or there's a romance writers club, it's a different kind of networking. It's networking not specifically to get work, but to learn about what's out there and kind of where you might fit in. You're not going to find it in a straight line, I don't think. You know, I ended up becoming a food writer. It's not what I ever set out to do. I was a journalist, and my favorite thing to do was to write profiles of people. And one day I sat down and I looked at 20 or 30 profiles that I'd written, and I saw that food was in every one of them. And I said, you know, that's really kind of interesting. And I said, I could be writing about Carolina food. And I said, wait a minute. You're not from here. Have you forgotten that you were born in Detroit? You know, you grew up in New York and Florida, which everyone knows is a suburb of New York. You know, but then I said, you know, the wheels kind of started turning, and I talked to some people, and I went to a writer's residency. I applied to the Wild Acres Writers Residency Program. Have any of you all ever taken part in that? They have workshops, and they also have individual residencies for writers. So I applied for a residency, and I got it, and I went up there, and they give you a cabin to live in for like a week with nothing but four walls and your own thoughts. It was terrifying. And they cook, you know, they feed you too because it's a big retreat center. So there you are, no TV. You know, it gets dark around 6 o'clock. After you've had your dinner at 5:30, there's the whole evening stretching out before you. You will find out if you can write when you go to a retreat or to a residency where it's nothing but you and the blank page. And that was what I did. And I kind of came to an understanding about my own strengths and weaknesses as a writer. You know, and I said, I really like to write about food, and I like to write about the people who make and prepare and eat food, but I don't want to be a restaurant reviewer. And I started really kind of focusing on food writing as a window into culture. And I said, well, I'm an outsider, so I can speak to what it's like being a new Southerner. We've got this whole Old South, New South thing. And by the time I was done, it ended up being a 440-page book called Hungry for Home, Stories of Food from Across the Carolinas, with, I think, 160 guest contributors who all shared recipes and stories of food that were meaningful to them. So a lot of them were first-time writers. Some of them were writers that you've heard of, such as Jill McCorkle and Lee Smith and Emmylou Harris and James Taylor, the songwriters, all of whom had Carolina roots and were willing to share their stories of Carolina food. So it became something much bigger than anything I ever set out to do. Now, I don't recommend that you sit down to do the same thing, but you may find out that you are a great memoirist or an oral historian working with older folks, or you may be somebody who has something to say to kids or to immigrants, or you may have a flair for nature writing or I mean, you just never know until you try on a lot of these different things. So back to the question, North Carolina Writers Network Conference, Wild Acres Writing Workshops, and or you can apply for residency, which would be just for you. There are all kinds of other things around the state that are beyond my scope of awareness because I'm in my little, cubicle in Charlotte. But again, with the folks like Stacy who have these great online tools now, Stacy's radio show and the Write to Publish group and the meetups and things like that, there are lots of opportunities to learn about more things in new and different ways more easily than ever before.
Now, with Novello Festival Press, as a publisher, from that perspective, kind of putting that hat on, what conferences do you have to go to every year?
Oh, well, having to go to a book conference when you're a book nerd is really a hard thing. You know, there are a lot of different trade shows around the country. Next week is the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance trade show in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where Southern publishers present their works to prospective buyers, which is to say Southern bookstores, and to a certain extent chain stores. So there will be booths by all the wonderful publishers in our region and some national ones as well. The big national trade show is called BEA, Book Expo America, and that's either in New York or California, or sometimes it's in Chicago, and that's where all the giant publishers and the giant bookstores come and meet and greet to learn about each other. You know, where else are you going to find out everything that a giant publisher like HarperCollins has coming out, or Simon & Schuster? You can look at their catalog, but if you go to BEA, they have a lot of their authors there. So it's kind of like a rock star situation where you get to meet a lot of the authors. And, you know, occasionally they'll have a president or a first lady or somebody show up and you can get books signed by them. So I don't get to go to that one because it's kind of big and expensive and hard for a tiny little publisher to justify the need to go. But the other thing is festivals. Did anyone go to the North Carolina Literary Festival that was here last weekend? Yay! Okay, you know, there are lots of wonderful festivals around the region. The Southern Festival of Books in Nashville takes place in October every year. Again, it's all free, and it's something like 200 authors in 3 days' time. It's an embarrassment of riches, but it's a way to get to interact with people and to see how booksellers sell and how writers present themselves and how publishers kind of interact with all the different levels of literary components. It's a very eye-opening thing. You learn more than you ever could just sitting and staring at your computer.
Those are some excellent recommendations. Do you guys have a couple of them?
A local one is Triangle Area Freelancers, triangleareafreelancers.org. I think you know about that one. I spoke at their first writers conference. Their third one is coming up in the spring. They're a lot of nonfiction writers, people who write for magazines, but who are also writing books. And some of it they do focus on the business of writing. So you can learn about how to write a query letter, how to get work, how to set up your home office, that kind of thing. So it can be really helpful. I attended Book Expo many years back. A small publisher I met said, you should go to Book Expo. You're going to get so much work. There's all these publishers there. And for me, trying to get work, it was a bust because the people manning or staffing the publisher's booth were marketers, not managing editors, and the people there were buyers for bookstores. So in terms of building my business, it was a bust. But I did get a picture with Cookie Monster, an autographed comic book, and a lot of free tote bags. So the actual trade show part is not necessarily the best way to build your business. It depends on what kind of booth is going to be there. And I know there's a lot of other, maybe not in North Carolina, but a good friend of mine, Mer Lafferty, who's a published author, attended Viable Paradise, which is a week-long writing workshop in Martha's Vineyard. Mm-hmm. And she says that was the best thing she ever did for her career. I think they specialize in speculative fiction, whatever that is. I'm not entirely sure. But, you know, if you can pony up the money to have that kind of concentrated work, it's been amazing what she and her classmates have done. Did you have something to add?
I want to add one, too, but you go first. No.
I was just going to say, talking about the festivals and things like that, I want to encourage you, too, if you go to one of those festivals, don't just wander around the booths that they have set up and look at the pretty books and you know, meet the authors. Go to the panels. And I know, like, the Southern Festival of the Book in Nashville, there, from what I understand, because I haven't been to that one yet, but there's a big public area. But then off on the sides, they have panels scheduled, and they had that at the North Carolina Literary Festival as well. You can learn a lot to go and listen to those authors because they will talk about the publication process. They will talk about their relationships with their editors. Some of the panels this past weekend were talking about the relationship between a writing mentor and mentee, and then how that morphed into introducing them to agents and talking about publishers and who would be the right one. So you can learn a lot by going to those panels. So if you're going to one of those festivals, be sure to take a good look at the program and go off to those panels instead of just the big public area.
Which gives me an opportunity to mention that I will be at the Southern Festival of Books on October 10th. probably giving a talk very similar to this one. Do we have any children's writers here or want to be children's writers? Go online and look up the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCB. Yes. And even if these national groups don't have local chapters, they often have regional chapters. There is also, for the ladies in the audience, something called the Women's National Book Association, a chapter just formed in Charlotte, although the organization itself is almost 100 years old. It was founded by women who worked in the publishing trades who were not allowed to attend the trade shows or, vote, because it was 1917. And this organization has been going ever since, and their mission is worldwide literacy. So there are chapters in a lot of the major metropolitan areas in the country. Now there's one in Charlotte. I'm sure you'd be welcome to join if you wanted to. But again, this is a way to be where people in the book trades are. Some of them will have something in common with you, a lot of them will not, but it is about that kind of social networking. And yes, they're on Facebook.
Who's next?
I've got 2 more rounds of questions, and then I want to take some questions from the audience. And I'd like to wrap things up within about 75 minutes. We've been going for about 45 minutes so far, so we've got about 30 minutes left. Again, I want to remind everybody that we are going to go over to Trips afterwards, where you'll have a chance to kind of chat with everybody in a more informal setting. Briefly, very briefly, in 100 words or less, describe your dream author to work with and the author from hell to work with. Laura, why don't you get us started?
I don't know if I could do that in 100 words or less. Dream author to work with, and normally I work for publishers. Remember, occasionally I will work for author. The dream author is actually the one who doesn't need an editor. The ones who don't need editors are the ones who seek them out and are very polite and respectful of my work. The ones who desperately need an editor but are resisting it will question everything I do, will try to talk my rate down or convince, it's not going to need that heavy an edit. It's only 100 pages, single spaced. Yeah, well, you do the 1-inch margins and double space. It's 200 pages, therefore my hourly rate, it's going to take more hours. Or people who confuse everything I do, because I've taken to talking to authors on the rare occasion I work directly for them and say, my job is not to chop this up just for the sake of chopping it up. If I do my job well, your readers read your content and don't get tripped over your language. I make you look good, and I make the publisher look good. And the good authors, the one I really enjoy work with, will read what I've done and say, oh my goodness, this is so much better. They think I'm going to rewrite. I don't rewrite. I don't reorganize. I tweak. That is my job.
I think that was 102 words, perhaps. Amy, so how about you? How would you describe, your dream author to work with, and how would you describe kind of the author from hell to work with?
Well, you've made my job a lot easier by saying the first 102 words of what I was going to try and condense down to 50. But I have had the great good fortune and the absolute nightmare of working with both of those people already. The dream author is one who knows what's at stake and has a sense of the big picture, or if he or she doesn't, is willing to learn what it means. Early on, an author who brought a very different sort of work that had questionable market value to us. We wanted to publish the book, and the book was brilliant and wonderful, but all of us, which is to say my 2 founding partners and myself and our editorial committee, thought that the ending was just too bleak and horrible and unredemptive, and that people would jump off of ledges when they got to the end. So we sat the author down and we said, we love you, we love your book, we have a suggestion, please don't hate us. And I saw this look come into his eyes when he said, yeah, I see it. Yeah. And before the words were even out of our mouths, he was envisioning that new, better, stronger ending that had so much more power and irony. Okay? So that's the dream author. Author from hell is one who took almost a year to resubmit to us her edited manuscript that we had agreed she would trim because it was wildly long. And she decided at that point that not only could she not trim it, that even if she could, she would not, because her work deserved every single word she put into it. And of course, when the reviews came out of the book, the few of them that there were, because nobody wanted to lift the doorstop that it became, one of the reviewers said, "What this author really needed was an editor. Where was her editor?" So I'm sitting at my desk going, "I'm here. I've been here." But if, you can't do or say anything at that point. But she didn't trust me. She didn't have the confidence in her work that it could withstand what I was suggesting she do, not what I was going to do. We weren't going to rewrite her work. We were going to say, tighten it, make it better. Make it a little, just do these few things that we've already had an 8-year track record of proving we know how to do. And heaven and hell.
After that, I can only echo what they said. The dream author is the author who knows that there are the rare instances where you end up with a bad editor, but I do think that's rare, especially if you're at a legitimate publishing company. The dream author is the one who knows that the editors are there to help and not to massacre the book, and knows that every single word is not important. That, like Amy said, it can look at the big picture. The nightmare author is the one who is late, returning everything, resists all the changes, does not trust that I have some idea of what the reader is going to think as they read it. Because sometimes you have this great thing in your head and you just need a little help getting it so someone else can understand it, because sometimes you put it on the page and it's not quite what you had in your head, but you don't know that because it's in your head. So the dream author trusts the editors, nightmare author does not, and fights, kicking and screaming every step of the way.
Yes.
Final question for you, Amy, from me anyways. In an ideal world, what kinds of changes would you like to see happen at Novello Festival Press over the next 3 years? And then what do you fantasize about as a publisher and editor, if anything?
Yipes. Well, like everyone in publishing, I hope and wish for a better economy. I hope and wish and dream of people remaining as passionate about books as I am. I'm deeply concerned about what's happened to newspapers. I'm concerned about the future of books. I am not eager to read books on electronic devices, and I should have prefaced that by saying I love my computer. I love my, touch screen. I love it's not that I don't like the gadgets, guys. It really isn't. I just don't want to need batteries to read a book. I don't want to have to rely on a third-party provider to download something to my device that then requires electricity or battery so that I can read it. And I sure don't want to have to worry about leaving it on an airplane. But in terms of what I would wish for, like anything else, health, wealth, and the time to enjoy them, books, and good ones, even some of the not so good ones that are still fun. Enough of a variety that there's something for everyone, enough of a dialogue and a cultural climate where we can say and do and express things that are sometimes disturbing and sometimes uplifting and sometimes don't have any other purpose other than entertainment. I guess I want it all.
I've had one or two opportunities in my career so far where I've found somebody or discovered somebody who at first glance, they just seemed like any ordinary person, and then I watched their book really take off. I'm sure you've seen that happen a few times. Can you describe if there's any pattern or consistency to that? Do you recognize it more easily now, having been in the profession for a few years?
I like to think that I recognize good writing, but that's not always what makes a successful book, unfortunately. So if you do not get pleasure and satisfaction from writing good writing or reading good writing, you should really find another line of work, because sometimes that's all you get. In the same way that looking at art or creating art should be, I think, satisfying and edifying on its own, aside from any marketability. Writing is an art form, and I think that as such, it has a different set of considerations than a lot of other products that are out there. But of course, the reality is that books are products, and they have to also be part of that commercial. You know what they say about the intersection of art and commerce? I go back and forth between which side of the line I'm working on any given day, but being here in a bookstore with all of you tonight is really wonderful because it's so much more fun than being in a hotel conference ballroom where we're looking to, really conduct strictly the business of books. Here we're in the presence of books and in the presence of writers, so that to me is as satisfying as anything else I do.
And then finally, Robin, where would you like to be in 3 years?
You're sneaky. Well, I'll preface this by saying I know life throws curveballs, so I don't ever like to say for sure what I'll be doing. But in 3 years, I'll still be working in publishing, I hope, unless something terribly unforeseen has happened. And I'll probably be transitioning to either becoming a literary agent or going back in-house to be an acquisitions editor at a not yet to be named press. I don't know which press that is yet. So that's what I want to be doing in 2 or 3 years. And I'll say that, and I put it in my bio every time I send it out, my passion are works about the South, and I really love literary fiction and literary nonfiction, but my passion is Southern fiction and Southern literary nonfiction. So whatever I'm doing, I hope that I am promoting Southern writers. That's really what I want to do. I see a little bit of a vacuum, whereas in the probably early to mid 90s, I saw a lot of regional pride and promotion of Southern authors, and that this was a very legitimate thing, and there were some publishing houses interested, and Algonquin was going gangbusters and promoting, and they're still doing very well, don't get me wrong, but they have been they have kind of come under Workman now, and I see, correct me if I'm wrong if you see something different, I see a little bit of a shift in things over there. I want to see a resurgence of promoting Southern writers, and that may be just a personal thing. You can hear from my voice I am Southern. You can tell by the way that I talk that I'm Southern, or maybe Italian, but I'm not Italian, I'm Southern. So that's what I want to be doing.
That's what you're passionate about.
That's
awesome.
what I'm passionate about.
Laura, how about you? Where would you like to be in 3 years?
Well, I'm in an interesting place now. I had, thought for a long time I'm a copy editor. If I want to go work for a press, I could be a managing editor, and realized I don't want to set schedules. I don't want to manage, but I won't actually get to edit, and that's what I'm good at. And I am in a bit of a career transition right now. I'm a certified professional life coach, and I'm enjoying that. I'm trying to ramp that up. So the copy editing pays most of my bills right now. But because I have this long history of written communication, and I've been in Toastmasters for 4.5 years, so I've gotten a lot of speaking, and I do speaking engagements, have a lot better oral communication now. I'm finding myself becoming more of a communications coach. That's my specialty. I mean, I work with people on their career path, but I have people come to me like, I have a phone interview for a job, and I have no idea what to do because I'm only good in person, so I coach them through that. Or people who I need to learn how to do networking, and I'm not comfortable with it, and so we talk on, whatever they need. So I would love to transition all of this into communications coaching. But people have said, well, even if you become a life coach, will you still edit? And I've always said, I can't see giving it up entirely. I think I will always have my hand in, even if it's one client, one project at a time, so it doesn't overwhelm me, because it's just satisfying to do work that you're good at it. And I'll have 3 months where I do nothing but horrible projects, and I just want to burn the office down, and there's got to be a better way to make a buck. And then a series of months where I get interesting, challenging projects that really help me grow as an editor. They're interesting, and I get to do good work, and I'm confident in my work. And I treasure those days. I've had a lot of them lately. But I'm also moving into, with the boot camp, training incoming editors. I realize that there's a need for that. There's not specific training, and I'd like to do more and more training.
That's awesome. Well, I want to remind folks that we are going to go over to TK Trips afterwards. Anybody who wants to join us over there, we'd love to have you come with us. Also, the planning meeting this next Thursday at Cameron Village Public Library, if you want to get more involved with the Right to Publish organization and the TV show, all the productions we've been doing there, as well as some planning on possibly starting our own press, a publisher as well. We'd love to have you at the planning meeting Thursday at 6:30 p.m. I do have books and DVDs that are available through the store if anybody wants to buy a copy of my book Claws, as well as the How to Publish a Book, How to Get a Literary Agent DVD. I can get one of those, pass it around. And then finally, did I mention that we have a tip jar up here for And I have a sign-in sheet as well. I'm going to pass this around. If you would not mind signing in, that would be great. So any questions that you guys have? We have a great panel here in the back.
We already did. We did a sign-in sheet. I don't know if
One of
everybody
them's
got
for me.
on it. Oh,
This is for Write to Publish. So
And if you're interested in the Copy Editing Boot Camp, you can see me. I got flyers.
there was a question in the back.
I do. I don't have a novel to submit, although I would love to. I love the novella, the shorter form of writing. And I read where Novello Festival Press and the Charlotte Viewpoint are getting ready to do something very interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, we are going to co-publish Novello Festival Press and an online magazine called Charlotte Viewpoint. charlotteviewpoint.org. Is it just about Charlotte? Not really. It's, as its editor Mark Perez says, it's kind of local, in the same way that the New Yorker is about New York. So please check it out, because we are going to co-publish within the next year or so a collection of shorter works that have been published on their website. So whereas it's very hard for us to publish a novella, a little short work of fiction, or an individual short story, this is one of the ways in which electronic media has become really super, because a short story, you can publish it online, you can take it down a week later, put up another one. We're going to do kind of an anthology of the pieces that have been running in Charlotte Viewpoint for the last year or so. So if you have a short piece of work and not a book-length work of literary fiction or nonfiction, look at charlotteviewpoint.org. Consider sending them some things. Also, there are lots of other places where you can submit work that is not book-length. There are community columnist slots at newspapers. There are magazine opportunities where you can write things. A lot of magazines have readers write columns, and I've submitted to 2 of them. One of them I submitted, the feature immediately vanished and was never printed ever again. I have to think that I had a hand in them deciding not to. But the other one was published, and I was published in American Bungalow magazine. Not that I'm an expert on bungalows, except that I live in one, and I wrote a piece about how my house fared during one of those weird Carolina ice storms that we get. People don't think of the Carolinas as getting ice storms, but y'all live here, you know what happens. And I had this little house that did really well because it was built real solidly and all that, and that was the piece that ran. So when you have these impulses to write shorter pieces, think of places they can be published. Every publication credit counts, especially if you're going to try to make the case of someday getting an agent, or getting someone to edit your work, or to critique your work, or get into a writer's group with people who have accomplishments. Get some of those, what I call ticket punches. But yes, to answer your question, if you have shorter works, go online, read poets and writers, look at regional contests, look at independent publishers. There are lots of different places for you to send feelers out into the world, and they do eventually lead to other things.
That was a great question. Another question?
I have a question. I was published in a journal up in Connecticut on interior design, and I was very fortunate, but I wasn't thinking at the time. I asked to get a PDF copy of it, and they wanted to charge me $1,000 for it.
What?
A magazine wanted to charge you $1,000 to give you an electronic copy of your own story.
The magazine was bought by another publisher, and that publisher said that I had to pay $1,000 to $1,100 for it.
I got a scanner. Talk to me later. There are a lot of issues to be considered about your rights. Very often when you write for newspapers and magazines, they will make you sign something or ask you to sign something that says they own the rights to your work. That's been the way traditionally newspapers have operated for many years. That's changing now, especially as magazines and newspapers have the opportunity to resell freelance content. And there have been lawsuits about it, and it's just a big mess. So if you retain the copyright to your work, which as a writer and a publisher, I insist that every author work hard to retain, you shouldn't have to pay them anything to have copies of your work unless they want to charge you some sort of like electronic digital conversion fee or something. But that sounds a little bit beyond what I'd consider customary, but I don't know the details. And
It was an established magazine that started a quarterly design magazine for me. And I never signed anything because the publisher knew somebody in my family, that kind of thing. And I wrote 3 articles for them for 3 different quarterlies. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I said, the only thing I have are my writings in the magazine.
Right.
I want an actual PDF from them.
email me.
Okay.
We'll talk. We'll talk.
All the way in the back.
I have a question, a couple of questions and comments. I'm glad to see that Novello takes collections of short stories. I didn't realize that.
Yes.
I don't think so.
People think that when we have an award competition that it has to be a novel. We say book-length works of literary fiction or nonfiction.
Okay, so that's the question. And I remember you now. I'm E.J. Stewart. I remember you and possibly from Beth Hutchinson at the main library in Charlotte. Been a long time ago. But, I enjoyed the panel very much. But I wanted to know, Laura, if
Yes.
you want to pass out contact information, because I'm doing a book proposal of Southern, yes.
Okay.
That'd be for her.
Robin.
Robin, sorry.
That's okay.
Robin, I just need some contact work. One of the things you said is people trying to get your prices down. I don't want to preface that with that, but I'm interested in just maybe an email or something to talk to you about.
Yeah, if you're
Editing.
if you're interested in talking to me, come up to me afterward, and I'll be glad to give you a card, and I'll tell you a little more about what I do and what I don't do, and we'll talk. And I'm happy to talk to people, and if I can't help you, I can help you find somebody who can. Usually, so yeah, come up. I'll be glad to
She
talk
won't
to any
bite
of
you.
you. I don't.
guarantee.
Yeah, I don't bite.
Here in the middle. Go ahead.
I have a question about the editing process. We're all familiar with 3 Cups of Tea. That's a really big blockbuster book. Right? And when I read the book, there's a lot of grammatical problems with it. Now, that was written by a professional writer. The story is fantastic. But how does that get past all those dangling prepositions? I mean, what was it trying to say? How does that get published?
You know, you're not the first person who's actually commented on that book about that exact thing. It's a great question.
Sometimes it just gets pushed through so quickly that these things get missed. There's not time. Sometimes these things are caught but still not corrected. My husband was reading an article about gaming, video gaming, and saw somebody's live report from the E3 conference said there was and my name is Laura Poole, okay? So said there was an army of Playboy bunnies dressed up like Laura Poole. I was like, he was like, hello, my wife? I don't like to say that. They meant Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. So, of course, I emailed the guy and said, not only did you spell my name, but I'm a proofreader who would have caught that. He's like, where are you and how much do you charge? He said 3 people caught it, and it still went to press that way. Now, there are stories of a few authors who insist on not having a copy editor. Daniel Pinkwater is one. He writes children's books that are great. And he has enough clout to be able to say, I don't want a copy editor. The other one is Anne Rice. Now, one of her last books was so riddled with mistakes. I didn't read it, but I hear that a character's accent changed and then changed back. Characters' names changed midway through. And her fans started writing, what are you doing? This is riddled with mistakes. How really, you're better than this. And she started a flame war with them. Like, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to read it, and I don't have to listen to you. And she lost a lot of loyal readers over that. So she's, I'm a best-selling author. I don't want anybody touching my book, so she can state those, and then she'll pay for it.
Quickly, my conjecture on that specific book, I think sometimes there are books that are just extraordinarily timely, and a publisher knows that it's timely and that the story itself is important enough that they might overlook the polished writing that we're accustomed to with more literary type fiction. And you know, I don't want to discredit that book, but I think that I've seen several people commenting on that exact thing about that book, and that might be part of the reason there.
And as far as specifically ending a sentence with a preposition, I've been told by my scholarly clients it's not so bad as it used to be.
Participles.
Participles are different. That does,
Really
you know.
difficult to, the sentence. You have to kind of edit it in your mind.
Yes,
What is
you
it
do.
trying to say?
Maybe that's what they're counting on, is you editing it in your mind.
Other questions, right here in the middle.
Yes, I've been writing my whole life, but I finally sat down and did the first novel and finally took it out of my head and put it on the paper. And I just recently finished it, and I'm trying to figure out what should I do next, or